Welcome to Verastahl, a YouTube channel devoted to my horror stories. I'm Brandon Faircloth, and if you enjoy the story you're about to hear, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, if you can click the notification bell, that does seem to really help people get notified when I post a new video. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to mention that my newest book, Sack of Knives, comes out on Friday, September 3rd. You can find links to that book as well as all of my other books down in the description below, and it's available for pre-order right now. It contains 23 of my newer stories, and I hope that you enjoy it. Today's story is called We Made Up a Ghost, and Now It's Killing Us. Part 2. What follows is my best recollection of what Ellis told me that night. I want to be clear before I start that I truly didn't remember anything more or different than what I told them or what I've written previously. And it wasn't like I just had a giant blank spot from age 10 to 15 or 20. I have memories, plenty of memories, of both my time at Stonebrook and what came after. It's just now I believe that I'm missing a great many things, and at least a few of the things I do remember never actually happened. That's the best and only explanation I have for my relative ignorance of our collective past. It scares me, at least in part because I now know that I've had one or more conversations with the rest of the 6, with my friends, about me not remembering things at all or correctly. This was before they realized how deep-seated my block was and gave up trying out of some combination of frustration and fear that forcing me to remember would do me harm. So not only do I not remember the events themselves, I don't remember them trying to remind me of them. It makes me feel that my memory lapses go beyond shock or trauma. More like someone or something intentionally fucked with my head. Even now, going over what I'm about to relay in this writing, I don't really remember it, at least not well. It's like I saw a movie of a portion of my life, and now I have trouble distinguishing what I actually remember from my life and what I'm just remembering from the movie. When I finish writing this, I'm going to call Mills and see if she's okay. Again, below is my best recollection of one of the last times I got to talk to one of my best friends. Alex, I know you say you don't remember, that you don't know what we're talking about, and we believe you. We do. But stuff like you mentioning the Stonebrook 6, your reaction when I mentioned the professor, I think you still have those memories in there somewhere and have just blocked them somehow. Or maybe they're being kept from you. Either way, I think it would be good for you, for all of us, if we explained a bit and see if it will stick with you this time. See if you're ready. Now, as you know, we all transferred from Jackson Elementary to Stonebrook Middle at the start of 5th grade. The building was weird and kind of spooky, and we all mainly hung out with each other. Between classes, we started out meeting up at that big oak tree that stood at the edge of the bus drop-off parking lot. But by 7th grade, we were changing classes as much as the high school, and we started running into older kids that were pissed that we were crowding their secret smoking spot behind the tree. We looked for another good hangout spot for a couple of weeks, but then Thomas and Cassidy found us a way into the lower rooms. You look a bit lost, so let me explain. The hallways of the school crisscrossed, with the vertical 4 halls being used for 5th through 8th grade, as well as special classrooms for things like music and clubs. The horizontal halls were used for 9th through 12th grade and had the administrative offices and the teacher's lounge. But as we figured out over time, each of those halls had another floor below that wasn't connected to each other like the floors above. It gave each floor its own private basement, and while the rooms had been used for classes at some point in the building's past, by the time we got there they were mainly used for storage, or a secret hangout if you could find a door unlocked. The door to the basement of the 6th grade's hall didn't lock securely, and by the time October of our 7th grade year had rolled around, we were already hanging out down there regularly. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. There was electricity, and the space was surprisingly clean, though there was a certain air of decay and disuse that always hung in the stale air. It was a spooky place, and the few times I was the first one to arrive, I had to fight the urge to go back upstairs until one of you got there. I think maybe that's what got us talking about ghosts. No, I interjected. I remember daydreaming in class about there being a ghost at the school. I was by myself and bored. I think I brought it up to the rest of you. Ellis frowned, glancing at Mills and Thomas. Well, that could be right. Either way, it doesn't matter who brought it up first. We were all talking about it, and we were all a part of what came next. At first, it was just us swapping rumors and speculation we had heard about the school as a way to pass time during breaks or lunch. Truth be told, most of it was fairly tame. It seemed the place had been a college at one point, but nothing bad had ever happened there that we could tell. No grisly murders or dark rituals, no crazy people or monsters. Of course, mundane fact didn't satisfy us for long. We would talk about the school being creepy, about maybe having seen something or heard something one time. There would be passionate debates about how a place that old and creepy must be haunted by at least one ghost, despite the lack of any evidence to support it. Then we turned to talking about what a ghost like that would be like. Cassidy is the one who came up with the idea that it was probably the dead soul of a former college professor. The professor, she suggested, had probably fallen in love with one of his students, and when his advances were rejected, he had killed himself at the school, possibly in the very room we sat huddled in between 4th and 5th period. It was just a story, of course, and we all knew it. But stories have power. So does belief. I've been thinking a lot about that the last few days, and I think stories are living things. Whether you're telling the tale or hearing it, you feed it with emotion and thought, with imagination and belief, and it evolves and grows. In time, a story can take on a life of its own. Over the next few weeks, we added a great deal to the professor. It became a kind of informal story contest, where we would all take turns creating stories that either plumbed some chamber of the ghost or school's past, or reported on some more recent indication of the professor's continued presence at the school. Thomas was first. Thomas's tale. Thomas told us more details about how the professor was seen lurking around the halls of the college in the months following his death. The girl he had been in love with had dropped out after his suicide, but returned the following quarter. She was one of the few women at the school at the time, and this combined with her prior absence caused her to redouble her efforts to catch up and surpass her peers. One night when she went to leave the school library, she found that she was locked in and all alone. Well, except for the professor. The next morning they found her bruised and bloody in a gibbering heap. She never returned to school, and people say she died just a few weeks later of some unknown malady. Millicent's tale. Mills added in how the building was actually built on the tribal grounds of the Arikara, a Native American tribe that once lived in the area. Or to be more accurate, she had added with dramatic flair, a banished offshoot of the Arikara that had been shunned by the tribe for their extreme cruelty and dark magic practices. They had used the location as a site for their black rituals, and when they were driven from the land, European immigrants found themselves drawn to the place as well. A village had grown up in the spot in the early 1800s, being a prosperous trade hub for local farmers and distant merchants for nearly 50 years. Then, during the height of the Civil War, a small band of travelers had come to town to find every man, woman, and child slaughtered. The initial reactions were to blame a rogue detachment of Confederate or Union soldiers, but closer examination showed that the townsfolk appeared to have all turned on one another, until the last one died of wounds she inflicted on herself. It was another 30 years before anyone dared to build in the area again, but people have a short memory where there's money to be made, and by 1900 the current town had started growing in that direction, and soon the school was being built. Some say the same dark forces that plagued earlier generations caused the professor to commit suicide, and may still stalk these halls today. Ellis's tale. When they bought the closed-down college and started renovating it into the middle of high school, they found all these weird, lower-floor hallways. Apparently they had been used for classes at one time, all except the one we were meeting in. That one had been a lab the college had set aside for faculty to use, though only a couple ever did. One of those was named Arthur Chester, a chemist that was known for his obsessive devotion to his research and isolated lifestyle. When the school closed, everything was very chaotic, but they did try to make sure that everyone was out before they sealed everything up. They went into every underground chamber, calling out for people and checking for signs that someone was being left behind. But Arthur had taken to testing his compounds on himself and lay passed out in a dim corner of a back room. He never stirred, and they sealed him in with no idea at all. When he awoke, it was another 2 days before he even knew he couldn't leave, and the theory was that he suffocated himself with gases from a concoction intended to blow the door off the hinges. All that's known for certain is that his face and hands were torn and broken from where he had frantically flung himself against the heavy metal door until his lungs, or his heart, finally gave out. Cassidy's tale. A few years back, before we were at Stonebrook, one of the freshmen saw something moving in the woods near the school. They thought it was a deer at first, and they pointed it out to a friend, but the friend didn't see anything. Intrigued and wanting to prove that their friend was wrong, they tried to get their companion to go with them to the wood's edge, but they refused. Determined now, they set off by themselves while their friend went off to class yelling a stern admonition that the teacher was going to skin them alive for missing class. When the freshman didn't come home that night, everyone began to search for her. It wasn't long before they zeroed in on her friend and what she might have seen. This led them to the woods, and while they had brought 10 people and a pair of dogs to search for her, it was unnecessary. She was hanging 30 feet up in the branches of a large tree not far in and along the main trail through the woods. Her skin had been flayed away and spread like ragged wings behind her, and her lipless mouth was held open by what they first took to be one of her own notebooks. However, on closer inspection, they saw it was actually an old essay blue book. Written on the inside cover was the name of the girl the professor had loved. These stories were told and retold over the course of several weeks, and every time that it would come to your turn, Alex, you would pass, saying you were still working on yours. We didn't push you, but we were starting to get tired of just rehashing the same old material, and for whatever reason, we didn't feel like we could move on to new stories or something else entirely until you were finished. So we started telling the stories to others. I think we were all doing it on our own at first. I remember the first time I talked about it to any of you, about how I told a couple of buddies in gym class about the professor. I was surprised to find you had all been doing the same thing. Stuff like that isn't uncommon, of course. Every school or town or group of more than 5 people have rumors and superstitions. Most of the time they have their time in the limelight and then fade away. Some stick around long enough to become urban legends or folk tales. But when we started telling people about the professor, it spread quicker and more powerfully than any of us expected. Part of it is that we were all telling it like it was true. We had taken to telling each other stories among ourselves, you included, so we were all practiced at telling details of the tales without stumbling or lacking confidence. Another thing was that even though we were all known to be friends, we were all telling different people who then spread it to others. Within a month, our versions of Professor stories had been told probably 50 times. That's not even counting the mutated versions, the spin-offs, the rip-offs, and the straight-up new stories other people were creating out of some kind of strange drive. Whether it was just an urge to be part of the current trend or something darker pushing them to do it. By Christmas, people were telling each other to watch out for the professor and don't go in the woods alone during the holiday. We thought it was hilarious, and were more than a little proud that we had inadvertently created a school spirit, at least for a little while. We had kind of figured it would die back down when we came back in January, but that was before Jenna Hastings went missing. Part 3. Jenna Hastings was a sophomore at Stonebrook, and she went missing the day before Christmas Eve. The last time anyone had seen her, she was leaving the mall, bags of last-minute Christmas gifts in her hands, and walking across the parking lot toward the fast food place on the corner. We were already out for the holiday break at the time, so it wasn't until a few days after Christmas that it became a big enough deal that the news trickled down to us. I remember us all sitting in my attic, playing sorry because we were too tired of being outside in the cold. Cassidy had just gotten there and was telling us about Jenna, and at first it was mildly troubling and interesting, but that was all. Jenna was 3 years older than us, which at 12 might as well have been 30 years, and while we all had some vague idea of who she was, we didn't have a clear idea of her as a person. Instead, she was more of a point of interest or a cautionary tale. But then Thomas decided to make a joke out of it. Cassidy had finished her short recounting of what she had overheard from her mother's phone conversation, and we were about to get back to the game when Thomas piped up with, "Maybe the professor got her." We all froze and looked at him. His proud grin started to fall away, and Mills punching him in the arm finished the job. "Idiot," she said with a scowl. "That's not funny, and it's dumb. The professor's made up." We were all nodding our agreement, and even at the time I knew that something felt wrong. We were all either 12 or 13, and none of us were known for being overly sensitive or afraid of dark humor. But we all shared a kind of desperate intensity in that moment. A need to not only rebuke what Thomas had said, but deny it. I thought about us sitting in that attic, scolding him while he grew sad and sullen. He didn't like being yelled at, but he didn't fight back like he usually would. It was as if he knew as much as the rest of us that he had made a mistake, beyond bad taste. I think that's one of the first times I knew we had somehow started to believe in the professor too. The following week we were back in school, and we had carefully avoided any further mention of the professor among ourselves during the break. Maybe in some unconscious attempt to kill the idea before it took deeper root. But our hopes that the rest of the school would have forgotten about our stories over the holidays were dashed as soon as we got off the bus that first morning back. Two of the school janitors had just set up a pressure washer to blast paint off of the concrete walkway just a few feet from the bus lot. They already had started spraying, but we could still see the neon green words emblazoned across the ground like a brand. The professor took her. Who's next? We found out later that the vandalism had just been discovered half an hour before the buses started arriving, and they had it removed by that afternoon, but the damage had already been done. The school was on fire with fear and speculation now, and the larger world had started to take notice too. During a class change, we saw two policemen out at the walkway taking photographs of the now partially obliterated message. Then, after lunch, we realized that they were still there, questioning several staff about it as well. The reason was obvious to everyone. They thought it could be connected to Jenna's disappearance, or at the very least, they wanted to cover every base just to be safe. Either way, this investigation just further validated the professor's existence to most of the students. Within the week, we were all hearing new stories about the school and the professor pop up, sometimes told to us by the same people we had originally told the original stories. For the first few days back, we tried to laugh it off or ignore it. And we didn't talk much about it among ourselves, but there was a tightening cord of tension running through all of us. It was quickly becoming something we didn't just not discuss, but something we actively avoided discussing. Then a couple of things happened that changed everything. The first was that the third week of January, Jenna Hastings was found. She had run off with a boy from the next town over that she had been secretly dating for over a year. He was an older boy who had made promises of taking her away from the drudgery of high school life and bossy parents, and who wound up leaving her at a burger joint 2 states away, not dissimilar from the local one he had picked her up at the day before Christmas Eve. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, and no one was more happy that she had been found than us. We began joking about how stupid people were to believe in the professor, how silly it all was. We would sit in our underground hideaway, sounding superior and proud of how everyone had come to believe in something we had made up. But the jokes and the laughter weren't quite the same as they had been before. Now they felt like we were whistling as we walked through a graveyard. Our forced humor and bravado meant to keep dark things at bay. In the next couple of months, talk of the professor did die down from its fever pitch after the graffiti, but it never really went away, and by the last week of school that year, we had just come to accept that, for good or ill, we had created a new legend for the school and the town. I say for the town because there was actually a newspaper article about the professor about 2 weeks after Jenna Hastings was found. It was a puff piece in the local paper, and it was trying to trade on the drama of the missing girl who had been found, while not explicitly saying her name. But it was still undeniably about the teacher ghost that locals had started talking about in recent months, and gave poor summaries of a couple of the stories. A few of our parents asked us if we had heard anything about this ghost crap at school, and we all denied it earnestly. We were ready to put it behind us. Then Ellie Marks, or as she was frequently called by her cruel fellow freshmen, Ellie Skid Marks, made the mistake of picking on Cassidy at school. Ellie was a heavy-set, unfortunately proportioned girl, and that combined with a dim intellect and a terrible temper led her to frequently shift between pitiable victim and merciless bully, depending on her surroundings. Likely from the outside, it was like watching some kind of social causality experiment play out. She would get picked on, she would become hurt and angry, and she would take it out on younger, smaller students. Our group rarely had much problem with bullying, in part because we stuck together and kept to ourselves, and in part because Thomas and Mills would happily beat ass if anyone tried to test things. Ellie had tried to test things a couple of times in the past when Cassidy was alone. Cassidy, who was small and beautiful and delicate, who had boys already noticing her despite her best efforts to fade into the background. I think we all knew that Ellie had been dealt a harsher hand in life than Cassidy had, and that's part of why she had never gotten worse than a strong warning from Mills when she tried to say mean things to Cassidy in the past. But the last week of school, the PE classes were all devoted to some combination of field relays and dodgeball, and Ellie just couldn't resist. Myself, Mills, and Cassidy were all in the same dodgeball game that day, and we were on the second round. Dodgeball always runs the risk of turning into a brutal free-for-all, but the teacher, Mrs. Perkins, she did a good job of keeping her PE classes in line. No one had gotten hurt, and everyone was having a pretty good time so far. And when Ellie got the ball in that second round, she headed straight for Cassidy. Based on the rules, she wasn't supposed to go over her team's half of the basketball court to make her throw. In the first throw, she didn't. The rubber ball thudded into Cassidy's lower back, startling her more than hurting, I think. But it was enough to get her off balance and send her to the floor. It was like seeing a falling gazelle for Ellie. She scooped up another ball as she charged toward Cassidy, waiting until she was standing over before throwing it hard at her upturned face. Cassidy let out a yell, and Mrs. Perkins began running over, blowing her whistle and hollering for Ellie to get back. The older girl started mumbling some half-hearted excuse that it was an accident, but the smirk on her face said that she knew she was caught and didn't care. Me and Mills rushed over to Cassidy, who was sitting up and had a large red welt starting to rise on the left side of her face, and her eye kept pouring water. When she saw the two of us, she started crying. I bent down and hugged her. Behind me, I could hear Mills talking to Ellie. "You just fucked up, Skidmark. We're going to get you for this." Normally, Mrs. Perkins would have jumped Mills for language in a threat like that, but I think she half wanted to hit Ellie herself. So she just told Ellie to go to the principal's office immediately, and that she would be coming along in just a minute. Then she turned back to Cassidy, who I'd helped to her feet. Perkins was asking if she was okay, if she needed to go to the nurse, when we started to hear Ellie scream. It took a moment for anyone to find Ellie because the sound of her scream seemed to echo down the 12th grade hall and into the gymnasium. Perkins and an assistant principal, who left the school at the end of that year, finally realized she was screaming from behind the locked metal door that led down into the lower rooms beneath the 12th grade hall. They fumbled around until they found the key, and when they opened the door, they saw Ellie laying at the bottom of the stairs in a screeching heap. Her right leg had been broken, which could have been accounted for by a bad fall down the concrete steps. But what was stranger were the bones of her hands, which had been crushed. They were damaged to such an extent that she could never use the left one well again, and the right one, the one that she had thrown the dodgeball with, ultimately it had to be amputated after several failed surgeries trying to restore blood flow. It wasn't lost on anyone that this had all happened right after she hurt Cassidy, and it didn't take long for everyone to also realize that you and Thomas were in class when it happened, and the three of us were all in front of a couple of dozen witnesses at the time. Plus, there was the fact that Ellie had somehow gotten past a locked door before she fell. But all of that was secondary to the biggest thing that made everyone at the school certain of what had caused Ellie's injuries. It was Ellie herself. While she never returned to school at Stonebrook, and we never heard of anyone talking to her about it later, close to 100 people had heard her screaming down in that dark that day. They heard what she said before her cries of pain and terror had compressed into a wavering animal wail. "Ah, oh God, oh no, fuck, it's got me, no, get it off of me, my hands, no, Professor, no." Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed parts 2 and 3 of this story. More will be posted soon, and to make sure that you get notified when they are, please make sure you're subscribed as well as click the notification bell. In the meantime, visit Verastahl.com for information about my books, as well as other news and updates. Until next time.